guess I'll start it. I want to reiterate Wanda's very good question, which I really want to hear the responses from the artists. So do you feel that this definition of Indigenous art is something that in fact is a container, or is it something that's fluid and shifting, and do you feel that it is something that also defines you as an artist?
What was the question? I feel like we have the ability and do define Indigenous art, I suppose, and it's always going to be the case. So, short answer, I suppose. Anybody else? Oh, by the way, I'm Nicholas Glennon. Thank you for having me here. So.
Indigenous, when that word kept popping up some time back now, my name is Robert Houle. I've always had a problem with how we are defined, because we're always defined by others. First we were misnamed, and then other words don't seem to work. I just prefer, for myself as a speaker, I just would like to address myself as an Anishinaabe, which means people. But then when I was intrigued, not intrigued perhaps, but interested, piqued by Diana's use of the word indigeneity. Of course, when I first heard that from Jolene, and it was in Venice, and when I got home to Toronto, I looked it up in the Oxford. Didn't exist, and I get the feeling that it does exist in the American dictionary, Webster, and I still have. I thought it was very radical for Diana to use it. I personally still have a resistance to it. And I think it all goes back to my resistance to how we are defined by others, particularly by the larger society. And but then again, I started to warm up to the word indigenous, and just about 5-10 years ago, and I had used the term in my email. I sort of bought that word after using Gerald Vesner's post-Indian warriors survivance, and when I was teaching at OCAD, and I began to use that. And but I still don't define myself. I know I was asked in a conference in New York a couple of years ago to try to define that, but of course I have absolutely no idea. I was just playing with the word, and I was just relying on my friend Gerald about the word. But then I checked Indigenous, yes, and I reacted again also in the catalog that Carol Apodidwarni put together called Troubling Abstractions. And she said, I guess she wanted to use the word indigenous on me. And this is like about 5 years ago. And I said, Carol, I said, I'm neither a plant or an animal. So we sort of left it at that. And I'm still sort of sitting on the fence, okay? I just want everybody to know that. Thank you.
You're looking to me to comment on Indigenous? Well, or actually, I'll interpret it that way, because I do have something I want to say about Indigenous. Beyond, its pragmatic use as a general term, I was just something that was coming to mind while Robert was talking and thinking about works in the exhibition and maybe a metaphorical image of the idea of Indigenous would be a garden. I was thinking of Gear's garden. and that if we think of Indigenous as a garden, it's Gear's Garden is a box, it's a container, but it's so much more than that. It's about the community that he's building and researching and learning about the individual plants, the medicinal uses of those plants, planting them in that garden. And then those plants grow and they bloom and they flower, and they're all individual, and they all have a beauty and presence in the world that is particular to that plant. And I think that, so Indigenous might be, if we look at it in a positive way, that it is a garden, that it is a kind of container, but that all of these plants, these people, our cultures, our identities that we bring forward and grow out of this box, transcend the box, burst out of the box, the roots go down below the box, that it's much, much more than that, and we won't be contained by a box.
Hello, my name's Danny Mellor. Perhaps I'm stating the obvious, but if we just return briefly to the ambivalence and caution that has surrounded terms like Indigenous, they do have a history of use, which talks about notions of restriction and also categorisation. But in terms of stating the obvious, where by agreeing to be in an international Indigenous art exhibition, in a sense, it's not a confession, but it's a movement towards the fact that we are Indigenous. And in fact, I would suggest that rather than constricting, it's actually a liberating thing. And indigeneity is not a restriction in that sense. If we look at, and I'm sure everyone here has seen the show, when we start to look at the variety and the scope of work and the way that artists, Indigenous artists, are actually dealing with ideas, with history, and with conceptual and contextual frameworks, what we can begin to realise is that in fact it has this marvellous complexity. There's an incredible beauty in the way that we are exploring, I believe, a whole range of different issues. And it's contemporaneous, certainly some of it you could suggest is postmodern, but it's relevant. And Indigenous in that sense talks not just of what we have experienced, but what we are experiencing and what we actually will begin to explore and innovate with in the future. So in that sense, indigeneity exists on a continuum, which while it's boundaried by definitions and understandings and certain intellectual frameworks, I'd suggest that in fact it's one of the, as an artist, it's an incredibly liberating thing to be able to tap into knowledges which are part of our ancestry, part of heritage, certainly part of a cultural framework, but also in that sense one which engages with broader Western theoretical conceptual frameworks as well.
I'd like to propose a new term, indigenuity.
Thank you, Alan Michelson.
It's pretty hot here.
Thank you, Richard Bell.
I'm quite familiar to the word indigenous. In the 1970, the indigenous peoples on this world had meetings. In 1984, I was in Panama. There I sat in a big conference room. Then the indigenous people shouted, "Let us, the indigenous people, unite." Of course, my art is a part of what I am, where I grew up, what I experienced. And I have been looking this big show, and you really should be proud, and we are proud. And I can see similarities. It is really a great experience. I'm really proud. You should be proud.